to another episode of Hawk Off the Press. My name is Madison Hricik. I am the Iowa football beat reporter for the Gazette, and we are continuing our summer Hawkeye assistant coach series, bringing in yet another new face. Well, sort of new, I should say. But we have our new special teams coordinator for the Iowa football program, Chris Polizzi. Coach, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Madison. I appreciate you having me on, and always happy to talk Iowa Hawkeye football.
And this is technically not your first stint in Iowa. You were with the Hawkeyes from 2012 to 2014. You were also helping out with the defense last year before you
Mhm.
got your promotion. So let's start and go back to 2012, 2014 when you were a grad assistant. What was that opportunity like? How did you get that? I mean, that's a different era of college sports. So what was it like coaching for the Hawkeyes back then?
Sure. So it really goes back to college. When I was a junior in college at Lake Forest College in Chicago, Illinois, our head coach Chad Isley hired a young coach whose father was actually a very well-respected head coach in our conference at Grinnell College. Greg Wallace was the head coach and had won Midwest Conference championships there. And his son Adam was actually a current member of the Grinnell team. Well, his other son Seth went to College and had graduated from there. And I think on recommendation from Greg, Coach Isley hired Seth as our secondary coach. So my junior year coincided with Seth's real time as a full time coach. And his current, his wife Erica was there. They were just dating at the time, but they were living together, really actually on campus. So that was my junior year, and then my senior year, Seth moved over to the offensive side of the ball, and so we had started a relationship there, and then he went from Lake Forest to be a graduate assistant at Iowa. I in turn went off and coached at several other places, and one of those stops was UCLA. Well, another young, lowly offensive assistant on that side was a guy named David Rye, who was a quarterback here at Iowa and would soon become a GA there. So I was at the University of Utah. I was an offensive graduate assistant there, and I was coaching the tight ends. And Charlie Bullen was the current DC, or excuse me, defensive graduate assistant at Iowa, and he was leaving to go to the Miami Dolphins with Ken O'Keefe. And Greg, David Rye called me and said, "Hey, we're going to have an opening for a defensive graduate assistant, and I think you're perfect." And so I got in touch with Seth Wallace and said, "Hey, I think there's an opportunity here. What are your thoughts?" And he's absolutely. And so he reached out to Coach Ferentz and Phil Parker, and this was really going to be Phil's first time taking over as the defensive coordinator after being a secondary coach for I think 11 or 13 years. So an opportunity to just one work with a consistent administration, a consistent head coach, a consistent style of defense that I absolutely leapt at. And my wife and I were engaged at the time, living in Salt Lake City, and the opportunity to move her closer to her home. She's from Monroe City, Missouri, a small town, just west of Hannibal, Missouri. It's about 2 hours and 15 minutes down 218. And she said, "Absolutely, let's go." And we fell in love from the moment we really drove into Iowa City. It's hard for people to understand the the culture, the community, the camaraderie, and the total alignment of the athletic department and its fans. If you're not here and you don't experience it firsthand, and we absolutely fell in love with it. And since then, when we were here the first time, and when you finish up your graduate assistant, coach says, "Hey, you want to coach? You got to go coach. You got to go leave the nest, and you got to go find your own voice." And every place that we went to, it was a comparison to Iowa, and not only Coach Ferentz as a head coach, but the administration, the assistants, the way we practice, the type of recruits that we tried to attract. So again, to have the opportunity to come back here to a place where you really found your voice. My first 3 years as a husband were spent here in Iowa City, watching how other coaches conducted themselves as husbands. It was a masterclass on how to balance your life of being, a coach and the best possible husband, father you could be.
And I remember when we had our first opportunity to speak with you during spring football, you had mentioned that you had taken away something from every stop you'd been to, but you had
Mhm.
mentioned the comparison to Iowa along the way. Um, was there something that you did, like, what were some of the things you did take from some of those other schools that you now feel like you can bring to the table as a special teams coordinator?
Sure. Specifically when I started off at Central Methodist, which is a small NAI school in Fayette, Missouri, it is a really, really remote area. There isn't a Walmart in town. It's a population, the town itself, of maybe 200 to 500, depending. And I think we maybe had 1,000 kids in the school, something of that nature. It was, I mean, really small. So you find out. Quickly there if coaching is really what you want to do. At Central Methodist, you're making the sandwiches for road trips, you're checking out the equipment. If the field needs mowed or painted, you're doing it. If something needs to get done, you better do it. There's nobody else that's going to handle that, and you become your own recruiter, you become your own travel agent. You if you screw up on a receipt, what I mean, there's nobody else to go to. It's on you. So um you really kind of cut your teeth quickly on is coaching what I want to do. And I think you get into it for the right reasons. We weren't paid anything. At the end of the night, I thought my day was done, but then I'd have to be the dorm director, and in charge of 28 young freshman boys in Woodward Hall. You know what I mean? It was a never ending deal, and you just can't fall in love with the process of developing these young men, because you're literally around them in every phase, which is not something that we're responsible for here. You know what I mean? We see these guys, but we don't see them in the dormitories. We don't see them in their other aspects of life. So it is unique in there. You go to a place like UCLA, where it's the polar opposite. We are in a hotbed of recruiting area. You know what I mean? It is a high academic school. There is a load of tradition within the program there. And I was, working for Rick Neuheisel, who was an alumnus of the school. You know what I mean? And couldn't have had more pride in the university itself and all that it had to offer. But that was very much about recruiting. I mean, you learn a great deal from how to recruit. We're battling USC and Texas for 5-star premium players. And we're sitting there eager as a kid pulls the hat. I'd never experienced anything like that. Well, then you fast forward to a place like Utah with Kyle Whittingham, who again was an established head coach. That was when I was there, they were transitioning from the Mountain West to the Pac-12. It was really their first year, and they were assured that they belonged, at that level of football. And Kyle put a premium on toughness and practice, and recruiting was kind of second. Not to say that it wasn't important, but he put all his focus and energy on the players within the program, and how do we, recruit toughness? How do we find that in the recruiting process? Didn't care about stars, anything like that. So that was an interesting aspect. And then you come to Iowa, and that's when all of those three things come together, where you're in the Big Ten, you're an established Big Ten program that is going to chase the best possible Hawkeye recruits that they can, but also puts a premium on player development. And when you go out on the recruiting trail, you have to have a projection in your mind that, can this player grow and develop within our system? I mean, is this the right fit for us? Does he understand and appreciate everything there is to know about the culture of Iowa, and that this isn't going to be easy, and there are going to be hard days, and that you're responsible for your own self development? That's when you really piece those things together, and then you take all that and you go from somebody that's working behind the scenes in so many different types of operation to now you're the position coach. I mean, so I was kind of back in that mode when I was at Western Carolina and Tennessee Tech and UT Martin. Now I'm applying all those things, but at every turn, you would say, okay, how would Coach Ferentz handle this? Okay, how would Phil Parker handle this? How would Norm Parker handle this? I mean, how would Seth Wallace handle this? How would LeVar Woods handle this? All those people that were tremendous mentors to me, you always harken back to what are some of the lessons that they were able to teach you, and it's served me well. It's one of the things that, again, the opportunities of football. I don't know that I would have had that if I had stayed at Central Methodist my whole career, or UCLA for that matter. But I think that's one of the things that I am able to harken back on, is that I do have some experience at different places with different levels that offered many different things.
Mhm. And you and I were talking about this before we started recording, but you had mentioned, this job kind of takes you everywhere while you're chasing it. This is not a job where you can really pick a place and stay there forever.
No.
And you've had your fair share of that. Not necessarily just geographically, but the positions you've coached on the football field. So I'm curious, what about special teams is different? Why do you have a passion for special teams? And how did that begin?
It started really, w- in my transition from high school to college. Everyone told me, if you really want to play as a freshman, you're going to have to earn it on special teams. And I knew I was never an overly talented athlete. But I did have effort, and I knew that if I could go harder, you know what I mean, I could go longer. Which coincidentally is, the mantra that we have on the back of our workout shirts, for the team this year. It truly does embody everything there is about special teams. You have to have tremendous effort, and I think that's been the bedrock, of what Iowa special teams is guys that give tremendous effort, guys that embrace the physicality, um, guys that are intelligent to know what is the limit of the intensity. We don't beat ourselves, you know what I mean, as a special teams unit at Iowa. And I think that's one of the things that you learn at a very young age as a player. And then, same thing when you're at Central Methodist. You're in charge of some portion of special teams there. I gravitated towards that, at UCLA. We had Frank Gans Jr., who had just come from the Baltimore Ravens, and the way that he presented his special teams, he always had a buzzword that to this day I could say, two-step redirect, crotch on a play side leg. Like, he just had this way of framing it, and his oratory command came from his father, who was, from the Naval Academy, and his dad was a legendary NFL coach as well, Frank Gans Sr. So you get to see the power of your presentation, and the influence you can have, on the team, because you're really speaking to everybody that's in the room, other than the offensive linemen and the quarterbacks. Everybody else is in there. So I think I'm drawn to that, where I have the ability to touch all these different players from different backgrounds, and try to, influence and develop them, and get to know these guys and get to know their stories. Sometimes when you're just coaching the corners, I mean, you don't get to know the running backs as much. You don't get to know the offensive linemen as much, the tight ends, because you really don't cross over. You know the wide receivers, you know the quarterbacks, because that's kind of who you're cross referencing. And it's the same thing if you're a linebackers coach. You know what I mean? I don't really get to know the wide receivers. I don't cross reference with them more. I get to know the offensive line, the running backs, the tight ends. So working with special teams, you know what I mean? And I'm at practice always evaluating. When you're not working with just those specialists, the kickers, snappers, and holders, you're really evaluating, the movements of some of these guys, and trying to, again, have that projection of, boy, that guy, he catches the ball so well. Can he be our off returner? Is he somebody for our hands team? Somebody with courage that can do those things. Or, boy, the way that guy runs. You know what I mean? Or you may even have something to say, look, that guy, something's off. He's not moving like he normally does. You know what I mean? And then you're able to dig and see if we can fix those things. But I think that's what attracts the most, is just, it starts with effort and attitude, and toughness and physicality, and then, stems from the technique part. You really, it's everything we're doing from a special team standpoint. Starts with leverage. You know what I mean? Tackling, ball security, block destruction, physical blocking. Both aspects that are the fundamentals of both Iowa offense and defense. That's what we're preaching, just on a larger scale, with special teams.
Mhm. And you're taking over for somebody who's been at this program for almost their entire lives, been in the state basically
Yeah.
their entire lives, in LeVar Woods. We can talk a little bit about your mentorship with him in a moment, but I'm curious, you're your own person and there's a whole level of coaching that you have that makes you unique. So what do you want Iowa fans to know about your own approach to special teams? What's your take on it? What do you look for in the right? But you started touching on it a little bit, but what do you look for when you start to build a special teams unit?
I think you look at what are the strengths of the players. What do we have here at Iowa that's maybe a little different than some other places, and it starts with the discipline of our players. I mean, we have a group that is hungry and passionate to play the game of football, and you see that at practice. So the different schematic things we're able to do, are fundamentally sound. We don't have to be very exotic in what we do. And we try to keep it as fundamentally rooted in blocking and tackling and block destruction and understanding leverage, and being smart, you know what I mean, and playing penalty free and mistake free. I think that's what kind of is going to continue to be the bedrock of what we do from a special team standpoint. But a lot of the uh, ideas, will be similar, but I think the biggest change is going to be myself, in the style of coaching that I have, which is different from Levar, but something that I think it's all about the players. You always want to put them foremost and put them in a position where they can be successful and not ask them to do things that they're incapable of doing, but also pushing them to never put a glass ceiling over what they think they are capable of doing. And that's, program wide, from Ray Braithwaite and Strength Room to, the Tyler Barnes and how we look at recruits and things of that nature, to Coach Ferentz and what is the expectation of our day to day and our players. And we have a good group. We have a very, very willing, good group that, I'm excited for them to go out there and the standard has been set. It was one of the first things that I mentioned to the team, that the way we play football here, that is the standard, and we cannot go backwards in any form or fashion from that. So I think that's what the fans can expect, and guys that just go out there and do it for each other and do it for the fans.
Mhm. And with the mentorship that you had from LeVar Woods, what were some things that you've learned from him? Maybe it's just the techniques, his passion for special teams, or something along those, like maybe something off the field that you've clung to. What has that mentorship been like for you?
One of I think was Lavar's biggest strengths. One was his connection with the players. He never let anybody go by and say, hey, how you doing? Because I'm okay. He would stop and genuine interest, and he always wanted to know how you're really doing. But the second thing was, I think he did a great job of finding value in guys that, needed to have a role in special teams. Maybe somebody that was third or fourth on the depth chart, or what I mean, a guy that was just kind of struggling to find his footing. LeVar would put him in a position in special teams to just get a little bit of traction. And once that kid got a little bit of traction on himself, all of a sudden he explodes. And just, it's, his progression just takes a total vertical rise. So that was one thing I thought LeVar did an excellent job, was just recognizing, boy, this guy can bring some value, and if we can just get him to understand, appreciate that role, boy, he's just going to take off. And there's special teams history of Iowa, at least since LeVar took over, is littered with stories of guys like that, where they just found their role, found their niche, and from there really had a tremendous impact on the team.
Mhm. And as we start getting a little bit more into getting to know the special teams unit, one question I think is interesting is, as a coach going into this role for the first time, do you find it maybe easier to walk into this role with the number of holes that you need to fill, or is it almost harder for you? Maybe those are like that might be a very broad way of saying it, because I feel like there's pros and cons to both. But I'm curious, like, how do you approach that with when there's this many holes that you're responsible to fill?
It's this is, I think, what you appreciate about the consistency of having a head coach that's going in his 28th season. There really isn't a situation that he has not faced, as far as we're replacing the whole battery. Boy, we're replacing one guy. We're replacing three guys. Everybody's returning. Everybody, you know what I mean? So I've leaned on Coach Ferentz and his expertise on how to handle some of these situations about a new group. And I've really placed more emphasis, and we as a staff have placed more emphasis on the guys around the new group of specialists, and say, hey, look, we need to make sure they're comfortable. You know what I mean? That no matter where the kickoff, the snap, the hold, the punt, that we're doing our job, to alleviate some of the stress on some of those guys, because it
Mhm.
really is a team effort. But I don't know if there's one way or another to say if it's easier or not. But I'm excited. The staff's excited. We've got a great group. They're working their tails off, and you just see daily improvement from these guys.
Mhm. Well, one player I want to ask about as we start kind of getting into this unit, it's one that you mentioned during the iClub event about a month ago, was Ike Spelt. You said this is somebody with a great story. This is somebody who you had kind of said during the iClub event just really embodies what you look for in a member of the special teams unit. I'm going to give you the floor a little bit here to tell his story some, but what about
Stumping
this
for
kid
Ike's
is so
belts, yeah.
what about this kid has been so special to you?
Ike is one of the few holdovers that we have from last year's group, and from day one. Again, it's one of the things that you get the opportunity to do is as a coach, you get to view kind of guys in their element. And I always told like, hey man, I was always watching you, and your work ethic was second to none. You threw your body around in there, and I really noticed a major transition in his physical appearance, his body. He gave himself to the weight room and nutrition every day. And you start to build confidence in a young man like that, and he really took hold of a leadership aspect of it. With Boston Everett and Tanner Philpott and Eli Osick, and now we just added Maddie McLaughlin to the group this summer. None of these guys know the day-to-day operations, and him along with Caden Boer, you know what I mean, have really done a good job of getting those guys acclimated to the program, and that's not an easy thing to do. And so Ike, to me, one the he wants to learn, he wants to continue to improve, and he's very hard on himself about his snapping. He works daily about understanding his vertical and horizontal leverage and improving on his tackling. But he's also handling a full engineering load. As a student athlete. I don't know if it's public knowledge. Just got engaged. You know what I mean. So he's a steady girlfriend that is now his fiance. So there's plans for that, and he's somebody that just has a plan and for success that he just boils down to his daily routine. I mean, this is what I'm going to be when I wake up. This is when I'm going to bed. And he doesn't have time for extracurricular nonsense. So, who better to lead this group than somebody that has such a narrow focus on what exactly they want to achieve? So, Ike has done a great job, continues to do a great job, but he's the first one to kid around with the guys and crack a joke and, I mean, try to loosen things up a little bit. But he's just been kind of a steady lighthouse for our guys to just use as we're all go through this together, really, as the first time as a special teams unit.
Mhm. And in summer workouts, you guys aren't able to, have them in pads constantly and all of that. But you do have the opportunity to still kind of work with these players a little bit. So
Mhm.
I'm curious. I think one of the biggest positions that people want to know about is what's going to happen with the punt and kick return. There have been names mentioned. There are people there are fans that might think it might go one way versus another. What kind of update are you able to give us about what this punt return battle or audition process is looking like so far?
It is ongoing. I think that we've got a lot of guys between KJ Parker and Zach Lutmer and Reese Vanderzee, not in that order. Brevin Dahl was doing a great job there. Braden Jackson's done a great job there. Jalen Watson has done a great job there. There's a lot of guys that have worked diligently on the jugs machine to earn that trust, and I think they all bring something different to the table. not looking for the next Caden Weegan. I'm looking for the next whoever wins the job. You know what I mean? I think it would be unfair to compare them to Caden, who really, refined his craft. He was another guy that worked really, really hard um, to get better at it and earn the respect of the teammates around him that were blocking for him. So it is ongoing. We do have a good group, and it's one of those things where until you have the pads on, until you have somebody screaming at them, it's sometimes hard to get a true evaluation. But they're working hard.
Mhm. How much of summer workouts can help in terms of figuring out who might work? You just said like it's hard to figure it out so you put pads on, but with them being able to go and do drills and be able to go out and just work on their speed, their catching, how much does that impact it come training camp?
Uh, I think it's one thing if you practice a craft, you get pretty good at it. And I was thinking about this the other day. The amount of hours that Caitlin Clark must have spent, passing the ball against a brick wall or practicing her dribbling or dribbling backwards. You know what I mean? Some of our guys have gotten into a new drill for our holders of trying to catch it one handed. And I don't know how many people try that, but they're getting pretty good at it. But it's because I can tell they're practicing it every single day. Guys are pretty good at tying their shoelaces, probably with their eyes closed. Just do it every day. So the more our guys are able to refine their talents by investing time in the things that will equate to positivity in the football realm, I think is part of it. That's why at offensive line we just sometimes just work on sets, and at defensive back we just work on your initial back pedal, because those are the things that are going to win football games. Same thing as free throws are what's going to win basketball games more often than not. The ability to make them, the ability to miss them. You know what I mean? So um, I think the more our guys focus on the fundamentals like that, the better off they're going to be.
Mhm. Speaking of the basketball analogy, did you get a chance to watch the NBA draft last night to see Bennett Sturts
I
get picked? Or
I did not, but I did see that he got picked and then immediately traded to Oklahoma City, which again I don't pretend to know anything about basketball and how that goes. I know it. I watched the NFL draft, obviously, and I don't ever see that normally. I still don't understand what happened with the Peyton Manning and Philip Rivers trade, but happy for him. Happy for him. I think he's going to
Mhm,
obviously a great organization, one that um, we looked at. All right, how did they? How do you make some parallels between what they did and how can we steal one nugget or something that they did? And one thing they talked about was, the other thing they focus on is they put a premium on winning. So if what we're doing, any of the drills, any of the actions, any of the conversations, any of the travel, anything that does not have a direct reflect on the winning aspect of it, then they're not going to do it. And I think you've seen how a young group has been so successful.
mhm. No, it makes a ton of sense too. I
Mm.
do agree with you. Sometimes the trades in the middle of drafts could be rather jarring. I don't think Sturts had got onto the stage by the time it had been revealed that he
Yeah,
had already his rights had already been traded.
I know. I was more concerned. I'm a Celtics fan, so I was more concerned with us keeping Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown. I was very happy that we didn't trade for Antetokounmpo. So
That makes a lot of sense. I don't blame you for that.
yeah,
I was just as a Wizards fan being from DC, I was just excited the Wizards had the number one pick. That was
had the number
I
one
at
pick.
that point it didn't
Yeah,
matter who they picked. I was like, you know what? They have the number one pick.
no doubt.
But back to football. Let's talk about place kicking here because it's another position where Drew Stevens had been in that role for a long time, had
Yep.
made his mark, now leaves. Two place kickers on this roster, one of them being Eli Ozick, as you've mentioned, coming from North Dakota State, the other being Caden Burr. What have you seen from the two of them? We saw a little bit of them during that open spring practice back in April, but it's been now 2 months since that. So what have you seen from their development?
Two guys that again are in a heated competition that want to win the job, obviously, but that are working through their fundamentals, and they work on our TrackMan system, twice a week, sometimes more, where they're calculating, all right, this was my spin radius, this was my, height at the line of scrimmage. And they're just focused on those things. I mean, how can I improve before we get back in there with helmets on and stuff like that? And they're working hard. And I'll tell you what, they're totally bought into the strength and conditioning phase of it. There's some specialists that really do avoid, what I mean, or just do it, what I mean, to the best of their abilities. And like true Iowa Hawkeyes, they have both embraced the weight room and the conditioning portions of it. And you can see some of the benefits of that paying off with just their strength and their endurance, even at this point in the summer. But
Mhm.
we had a session today that I thought was very, very productive. And again, they're both working. And, we spent a lot of time in Kinnick this summer, what I mean, in the month of June. Sometimes they would go in by themselves and just working on getting more comfortable in the friendly confines of Kinnick Stadium, because there are quirks to that stadium, from wind, what I mean, from the sun, from different aspects of it. What is going to be my mark as I'm facing the north end zone, the south end zone. So both of those guys are working really hard, not at just kicking it through the upright, but all of the things that come with that.
Well, and I think something that is mentioned, and you just kind of touched on it here, is the fact that when you kick in a different stadium that you're used to, it does feel different. It's
Yeah.
not the same thing, even though sometimes it can almost look automatic. How does I mean, a repetition is probably the key factor here, but how does a kicker get used to a new stadium, especially when you don't have fans involved or things like that until much later into the season?
It's just work. It takes time. The same way where, when guys go out for a shoot around, they're seeing, all right, what's the bounce of the rim? You know what I mean? How soft is this rim right now? What's the floor like underneath? It's the same way for us, as I know Tim Lester, when he comes out with the quarterbacks, the first thing he does in a new stadium is he points out the play clock at each end of the stadium. I mean, hey, you have to know when you're looking up for the play clock, how much time do I have left? Your eyes have to go right there. It's the same thing, what I mean, where we talk to guys about, what this is the windage, this is what we're thinking. And we do stuff, before the games. We talk about, all right, the stadium faces this way, so there's potential for a shadow. There's potential for the wind coming out of this direction. But it's really understanding, hey, this is going to be my aiming point. This is what I'm aiming for here. This is here, there. And really trying to make it as small as possible. Not, boy, I want to aim for the A in Hawkeye. I want to aim for, the top right corner of that A. And that's what I'm, trying to put my mark on. So it just takes time with guys to become comfortable with those deals. And indoors and outdoors, more for an outdoor stadium, obviously, but the indoor stadiums with Eli, he had his fair share of places that he kicked. So yeah.
Mhm. Well, and while we'll stay on, I guess, booting the football, we'll talk about punters here too. Both punters for Iowa coming from the transfer portal,
Mhm.
more or less, I should say. You have Tanner Philpott and then you have Boston Everett. These are two young guys too,
Yeah.
specifically. These are younger, these are younger punters. Same thing as just about every other position you're working with, also in a battle. With these guys being a lot younger, though, there's a little bit more of an ability for you to mold them as well. What's it like being able to have these guys where you can really kind of take your time and mold and develop as they're fighting for a starting job?
Yeah, and you touched on it, but two really coachable young men, that are, totally honed in on their mechanics, and they don't just rely on leg strength to kick the ball. Big time students, and they work diligently, not only on the punting portion of it, but both of them are battling out for the holder role as well. You know what I mean, which takes time and takes continuity. And what I mean, they work very hard at that. So you appreciate the fact that these guys come in every day with an attitude of, all right, how can I improve upon this? And they there's really three phases that you want them to work on as punters. One is the traditional directional punt. The other one is a rugby, and one's left-footed. The other one is right-footed. Um, and then our pooch punts, our plus 50 punting, and they work really hard at all three of those phases. Not saying, well, because Boston has naturally been a rugby guy, well, he'll be the rugby guy. That's not the case. Or Tanner's mostly done traditional. He's done a little bit of rugby. He'll be the traditional. That's not the case. They work really hard at all three of those phases, and you tell you what, it's a great competition, and they work so well with one another. just complimenting one another, and it's genuine. And you're excited to see them continue to work on that. And again, the more we can do it with pads on, with people rushing at them, the better off we're going to be.
Unfortunately, you gotta wait a little bit longer for that. As much as I know you all are, it's starting to itch back onto the field. Although you do get a little bit of a break here soon as we get to July. Finally get to
We we do, we
more or
do,
less, yes.
we do. We had a good session today, and I kind of mentioned to the guys that, hey, we're going to. I want you to take next week off. Really just kick one more time. You know what I mean? And between Tuesday and Thursday, that's the only time I really want you guys to kick, just because, you've been working diligently, and now we're preparing to go into camp and literally kick every day, and then, into the season. So again, it's a progression for our guys that we're working really hard for them to understand. And, um, like I said, they're excited to get a little bit of a break here, in the next week.
Mhm. Well, just to kind of wrap this up here a little bit, kind of looking back at the general picture of this special teams unit, but what about this particular unit has been so exciting for you to work with, for this being the first special teams unit that you're working with as Iowa special teams coordinator?
Sure. Now, just to be specific, are you talking about the specialists, or are you talking about like the whole
Let's talk the
105
whole
guy?
unit.
Okay.
Let's go
Okay.
everybody.
I think what's most exciting about the whole endeavor is the buy-in from all of our players, from a practice rep standpoint. There's nobody hiding in the back. You know what I mean? As we're taking reps, there's nobody that's falling asleep in meetings. These guys are totally locked in. They always come in with a notebook. There's more guys that come in after practice. Hey, coach, can I steal 5 minutes? You know what I mean? And can we watch this rep here? What are we exactly looking for here? And so the eagerness and the buy-in from these guys, and when you can equate it to as much same as we do, where it's, hey guys, it's the exact same tackling drills that we're working on, just on a broader stage. And we're talking about tracking the backside hip, putting your eyes up through the chin, and wrapping and grabbing cloth. Same thing from a ball security. I want that ball locked. I want the, wrist above the elbow. Like, these are the things that we're looking for from a ball security standpoint. So they see, hey guys, if you're doing this well, you're going to do it well when we're actually playing offensive and defensive football. And they truly see it as the third phase of the game, and they appreciate it. So I think just the attitude of our players every day when they come in the facility.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a lot of Hawkeye fans are going to be very excited to hear that. And I'm certain there'll be more that'll be even more excited as we get closer to training camp. But coach, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. This has been great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madison. I appreciate you.
Yes, and if you guys like this content, there's a new Hawk Off the Press every single week that comes out. There's also a free newsletter with the exact same name, Hawk Off the Press, that you can sign up for at Gazette.com. That comes out every Tuesday and Friday mornings. They're free both times a week. There'll be more football content coming up. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time.